Hey, how are you today? This is Josh Patrick, and you're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. And my guest today is Scott Reib from Reib Law, and he is the author of a new book called Seven Strategies to Shatterproof Your Business. And I kind of curious how I can shatterproof my business. So let's bring Scott on and start the conversation. Hey, Scott, how are you today?
Hey, Josh, I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show.
My pleasure. Shatterproof my business. That sounds like an interesting idea. So let's go through the seven strategies and see how far we get today. How's that?
Sounds awesome.
Okay.
Yeah,
What strategy one?
yeah. So the first step in shatterproofing your business, Josh, is that you need to assemble what I call a team of key advisors, right? And those advisors start with a CPA. Every business needs to have a CPA that can advise them on how to know their numbers, right? You have to know your
Yep.
numbers, and then make sure that you keep most of your money and not give it all to the government, whether that's Uncle Sam or if you're in another country, pay taxes. Right, that's kind of the first advisor. The second would be you need to have an insurance broker that can help you protect the business from the known risk. Every business has some known risks that you can insure for. The third would be you want to have a banking relationship, a banker. That's someone, a person, it's not a bank, that you can call, that you have on speed dial, that if you have a question about your account, that you can call them and they will call you and they'll help you set up things like lines of credit. They'll help you make sure that if you needed to write a check today and make a deposit tomorrow, that you have that kind of relationship with the bank.
Okay,
Right.
so
And then
let me
go
just
ahead.
stop you right there because
You bet.
that's a key thing, and most business owners blow this one. Um, so I'm a big fan of community banks versus the money center banks.
Me too.
So if you want to have a relationship with a bank, make sure it's a community bank, which is a small bank where you actually have a relationship with your loan officer, and you're just not a number and or a credit score. So that's really good advice. Keep going.
Yeah. And so the next thing you'd want to do is make sure that you have an attorney, right? It's not last but least. You want to have an attorney. And that means that you've already got one. You don't have to go find one when something bad happens. Because it's not if something bad's going to happen in your business, it's when. And you need to have that relationship lined up. And it needs to be something that you can afford and someone you're comfortable with, because you need to be very transparent. All right. And then the
Okay.
last but not least is you need to have a business coach. It's very hard to grow a business exponentially and get where you want to go fast without a guide. And the business coach can be your guide and hold you accountable to the plan of action that you've created with them. Without them, I couldn't be where I am today. I couldn't have broken into six figures and couldn't be on my way to seven if I didn't have excellent business coaches.
So
Okay.
let me since that's my world, I want to just step in and add a piece there. There are essentially in most of the world, there's two types of business coaches. There's the economic business coach, who is your accountant, lawyer, business advisor, who helps you with creating an economically sustainable business. And the second type is the personal coach, who's going to help you not get burned out. And that's for personal sustainability in the business.
Right.
Typically, people find two of those. If you can find one that does both, you're much better off.
I would agree. I definitely agree with that. That's not easy to find, but if you can find
No,
them,
there's
that would
not.
sure be
There
a
aren't
plus.
many of us around. I'm one of the few that can actually do that and have training on both sides of it, but they do exist. It's probably 1 or 2% of the business advisory people in the world, is my experience.
I
So
would
a
agree.
very low number, and they're hard to
Yeah.
find. Okay, that's step one. What's step two?
Okay. Step two is to create your business on a solid foundation. And what we're talking about there is that you need to have the right entity or enterprise structure for your business, whether it's a corporation, whether you need limited liability company, whether you need multiple limited liability companies or a limited partnership or some other form. You want to make sure that you understand the different forms and what is best for your business so that you can have that foundation to build everything on. You don't want to go back later and have to fix your foundation. No, I just moved out of a house I'd had for 16 years, and that house had foundation problems. And we would have had to put lots of money into going back and fixing that foundation. I wanted that to be someone else's problem, so we sold it and let at a reduced rate and let them fix it. You don't want your business to be like that, and the entity or form that you form is that foundation. So you want to make sure you build that right. Okay, does that make sense?
Cool. That makes sense to me.
Okay, right. So we do that, and so now we've got the advisors and we've got a solid foundation. And then the next thing you want to do is create a system for what I would call documenting everything. Okay.
When you say documenting everything, can you be a little more specific about that?
Definitely. Right. So in your business, there's a couple of things you want to look at. We've just set up this great structure, so we have a solid foundation. Now there are formalities that you need to document. You need to have annual meetings and keep minutes of those meetings. You need to document your human resources. That means you have offer letters, applications, you have contracts with your employees. If you have independent contractors, those are written agreements, right? And then everything that you do as far as selling for your business, you have written proposals. You keep those, copies of those, and you have written contracts with your customers, clients, patients, whatever you have in your business. But everything is written. And if you need releases, then they're signing those, and those are written. Now, this can all be digital. Documentation has changed over the last decade. It can all be digital, but you need to document all of those things.
So most business owners I know do a pretty bad job of that.
Yeah, almost all of them.
Yeah.
That's the number one problem I see in small business, is that they're all still doing handshake deals and not documenting things.
Well, the truth is, I've had a whole bunch of businesses over my life, and a fair amount of them, the clients just won't sign contracts. That's the end of the con. If you want to do business with me, it's a handshake, and that's the way it is. I really rarely had a problem with that. And, it's sort of when I go to somebody and I say, gee, I want you to put this under contract with me, the first thing they're going to say, why are they doing that? And why don't they trust me? So do you have a good way of getting somebody to sign a contract that likely doesn't like to do so?
Sure. There's multiple ways to do that. And one thing is, you want to kind of remind people that the reason we're using contract is not because there's distrust, but contracts are what we use to keep honest people honest, right? So we can go back and look at what we agreed upon later and be able to easily see that these were the deal points. So here's how you do that in a very simple way, maybe without even getting a lawyer involved. You have your phone conversation with your prospect. You agree on whatever the scope of services are going to be, and you've asked questions of each other. You've narrowed it down to, here's the 7 deal points. You type those into an email. Dear prospect, here are the 7 things that we agreed that we're going to do for you, and then ask them to confirm by email that they agree with those terms. Right now, you have a contract, and it's very easy to go back now. And when they say, hey, you're supposed to do X for me, and you can go back and say, now let's look back at the email agreement, and we have these 7 things and only these 7 things. If you want to do the 8th thing, we can do that, but that's a separate deal. But if you document it with an email, a reply to an email that's unequivocal is a digital signature, and so you have a contract. So you don't have to have a 10-page bulletproof document that a lawyer has reviewed and that no one in their right mind would sign. But you need to have something that's clear, that shows what you're going to do for your customer or client, and maybe what you're not going to do, what's excluded. But that can be very simply in an email. But I've found, I've been in business almost 16 years here at Reib Law, and almost everyone is willing to sign a contract if it's simple and clear as to what you're trying to do. The problem is most contracts are prepared by what I call deal killers, and they're so long, and the language is so full of lingo mumbo jumbo that no one in their right mind would sign it. And so you don't want to do that. You want to use very simple, plain forward documents that say, this is what my company is going to do for you. This is what I require of you to do that. And these are the dates and the amounts of money that are going to be exchanged hands. And if you do that in a very clear, simple way, most people are going to be willing to sign your agreements.
Cool. So what's the next thing on your list?
The next thing is you want to use a professional registered agent. All right. And a lot of people don't even know what a registered agent is. But if you have a corporation or LLC, the state requires you to have a person that is responsible for receiving notices from the state and for receiving notices of lawsuits. That's the two major things. And a lot of people will just make themselves the registered agent kind of by default. Well, that's okay, except sometimes you go on vacation, sometimes you don't open your mail because you're too busy taking care of business, and something can get overlooked. Your charter for your corporation could be forfeited, or you could have a lawsuit against you that you didn't know about and didn't answer. Another thing I see a lot, Patrick, is that we'll use a CPA maybe, or even a lawyer as your professional agent, and they go out of town, go on vacation, or you switch 2 or 3 times to different professionals, and now it's 3 back. They have no relationship with you, and it doesn't mean anything to them, so they don't forward it to you in a way that gets your attention. How this goes wrong is they don't forward it. Someone has sued you. You don't file an answer because you didn't get it, and suddenly you've got a judgment against your company for several $100,000. I've seen this happen. I get a call from a business owner that's distraught because the sheriff or constable is at their place of business, locking the doors and seizing their assets for a judgment they didn't know existed. That could have all been avoided if they had a professional registered agent. And there's multiple companies that do this. It's not hard to find.
So what you're saying is you should get a separate company as a registered agent who is not a lawyer, who's not a CPA, is not
Correct.
you, but is a company that only accepts services.
Correct. And they do it 24/7, 365. So they're always there for you. Most of them have really nice internet portals where all those documents are stored so that you can access them easily. They'll text you, email you whenever there's an alert.
And how would you go about finding a registered agent?
If you just Google registered agent service, you'll get a list as long as your arm that gives you a very good list. And if they'll reach out to me, I can make some recommendations of companies that are reputable, do a really good job of that, and lead them to a good professional registered agent.
Yeah, that's good advice for folks who are listening. If you want to get a registered agent, don't search on the internet. Call Scott. You'll likely get a better person. There's too much junk on the internet when you start doing searches. So make sure you find somebody that's reputable if you're going to do that.
Yeah.
What's next for you, Scott?
The 5th is call an employee an employee. And here's a huge mistake that a lot of business owners and online entrepreneurs make, is that they think they've got someone that's an independent contractor. That's what they're calling them. But they're telling this person what to do. They're supplying the tools to do it. They're controlling how they do their work. And in actuality, it's an employee. And at some point in time, that employee gets audited by the IRS, and they say, well, my employer never took out the taxes. And suddenly the IRS comes back to you and says, hey, you didn't take taxes out for your employee. And so now you owe both sides of the payroll tax plus penalty and interest. And there's another great add-on for this is that you can't bankrupt out of this tax. There's no way, you can't get away from it. It goes through your corporation to you as the business owner. You have to pay those taxes. So if you misclassify someone, there can be very big penalties. And to most business owners that I work with, and they work on small margins, people, and it could be devastating to suddenly have to pay a $20,000 bill because you misclassified one employee. What if you've misclassified 100 employees, right? So you need to be very careful and err on the side of calling people an employee. An employee is someone that's doing work for you, even if it's on a temporary basis. That would be a seasonal employee or part-time employee. That's not an independent contractor. An independent contractor is someone that has their own tools, has other customers that they work with. They just do projects for you occasionally, and there's a set price for that project, and they get paid. You're not keeping track of their hours. You're not telling them when and where to show up and providing tools. All right. So make sure that you're classifying people the right way. It can really avoid some really big headaches down the road.
There's 2 things I want to talk about in that particular thing. One is it doesn't mean you shouldn't use independent contractors. It means you should follow the rules if you're going to use independent contractors. If I'm not mistaken, I think there's 7 or 8 things that the IRS looks at to establish whether you're an independent contractor or not.
They actually, there's 20 points that they utilize kind of as a test. And not any one of them is conclusive. It's kind of a total sum of what's going on, but there's 20 points. The first one would be, must the individual take instructions from your management staff regarding when, where, and how the work is to be done? Okay, that's one
Right.
point.
That's the biggie. That's the biggie.
Yep.
The other biggie, which I've been told over the years, is that you want to make sure that your independent contractor is not just independently contracted to you, that they actually do have other businesses they work for.
Correct.
Or unless you're a specifically excluded person, like we have a wealth management business, and the people who are associated with the wealth management business get their own 1099s, have their own corporations.
That's right.
They set how they work and what they do and when they do it within the rules of the SEC, but I don't tell them when they come in every morning.
Right. Yeah.
So there's the second thing, Scott, I want to ask you is, you just said call an employee an employee. Can I call an employee a team member?
Yes, you can. But a team member, if you start calling independent contractors team members, for instance, then they're probably an employee. If they're that integral of a part of what you do on a daily basis, they're very likely an employee.
No, I'm just talking about people that would call. I have talked to several business owners who absolutely hate the term employee. They said they're not employees or team members.
Yeah.
And
yep, I understand. When I worked for Disney, I was a cast member years ago. Yeah, I was not an employee. I was a cast member.
Yes, but you're actually an employee, even though they called you a cast member. But that's okay.
Right. That's
so
okay. You can make up other words for it. Just make sure that when it comes to the taxation, that you're classifying them as W-2, which would be an employee.
Right. So you're paying them W-2. Yeah. What's next, Scott?
The next thing on the list is protect your intellectual property. Right?
Ooh,
intellectual property.
Biggie.
Yeah, it's huge. It's really the lifeblood of your business. It's your brand. It's what you're selling. It's your ideas, and there's very specific ways to protect them. The categories of intellectual property are, patent, trademark, copyright, trade secret, and confidential information. Those are the main categories. Most entrepreneurs don't have patents. Some do, and if you do, you need a patent lawyer to help you with that. Every entrepreneur pretty much has a brand name that should be trademarked if possible. If you don't register your trademark with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, someone else could take your trademark and use it in other areas of the country where you are not, and you could get locked out. The other thing that could happen is you could be using a brand name that you don't own. Someone else owns it, and you don't know because you didn't go through the trouble of getting that registered with the United States Trademark Office, and you've just built your brand on top of someone else's, and you get sued for infringement, and maybe even worse, have to start over several years into your business. Had a client that is in the DJ business. They, for over a decade, they bought the business from their employer and realized when they came to me that they had not trademarked the name. No one had trademarked it. So after a decade, they're in several states. They have to go roll the dice and see if they can get it registered. It was very close. We got it registered. But had they not, they would have had to rebrand this decade-old business at a huge cost and probably loss of business. Just because someone didn't do their work up front. You've got to protect your intellectual property as you create it, not go back later and do it. As you create it, protect it.
And I'm going to add one more thing there. An awful lot of small business owners today are online advice businesses of one type or another. And you have a bunch of intellectual property, ebooks, infographics, checklists, systems, whatever they are. We like to see those put into a separate LLC with a license between the operating company and the LLC. So if they come after the operating company, you're not flat out of business. You just reopen and relicense from that LLC. So especially if you're doing public events, this becomes crucial.
Exactly how I advise all my coaches, speakers, trainers, and online entrepreneurs to do theirs. You should have that separate IP holding company and license it to whichever operating company needs it at that moment, which could be a coaching company and then could be an event company, depending on the time, what they're doing. But by having that in a separate company, it's never exposed to the activities of the operating company that does business with the public, because the public is where all the liability is. The other thing you want to really watch out for is, like you mentioned, we're constantly giving away content because that's what we're taught to do, is give value to then so that we can then bring people on board for paying services. Even that free stuff needs to be protected, because you don't want them to take that free stuff, start trying to make it their own, pirate it, and then start giving that away as their free stuff. So you have to make sure that you're doing the things necessary to protect the stuff that, if it's worth putting into an ebook, it's worth registering the copyright for. Not a big deal to do it, and make sure you're protecting that stuff. And then podcast, you got to make sure that you have all those things protected. And then kind of an overlooked one is confidential information. So when you're hiring employees, you're hiring independent contractors to do jobs, you want to make sure you have in your contract a confidentiality clause that protects your company's confidential information. If you don't treat it like confidential information, they won't either, and they'll take it and use it, and you'll have a very tough time convincing a court that it was important to you if you don't have it documented in your contracts.
Okay, so I've lost track of how many we're at. Where are we? We have time for one more.
Perfect. We're on number 7. And this
Good.
one's really, really hard. Don't use someone else's stuff, right? So this is the other side of the coin. And it's the one that especially people that are online have a big problem with, because we're throwing together web pages, we're doing social media posts, we're doing all these things, and there's all this great free stuff on the internet, right? Google Images that I can just grab because that's a cool image. It must be free. It's there. No, it's not. All of those images have copyrights attached to them, and you got to be careful. And you want to make sure that you're either using true royalty-free things that you can use. So you have to read the license, follow the terms of service if you're going to use those images, and even better, find a service where you can buy what you need and buy the images that you want to build your website, to build your social media campaigns, so that you know for sure that you're in control. Because I've seen a lot of clients hire webmasters, social media companies to produce all this stuff for them. If they're not careful, they'll use things that aren't licensed, that they don't have permission to use. You'll get a letter in the mail from a really nice lawyer demanding $5,000, $10,000 because you've infringed someone's copyright. And folks, there's no defense. There's no oops defense for that. You're on the hook. You maybe can negotiate down the money, but you're going to pay something to get out of that. And then you have to start over on whatever that digital campaign was. So don't use other people's stuff. If you need to use it, get permission. A lot of people will give you permission to use limited portions of their material, or you can buy a license. But don't use other people's stuff because you don't want them to use yours. And that is the 7th strategy to shatterproof your business.
Cool. And I've actually had a bad experience with that. We now use sites that have site licenses, so everything on their site that we choose is licensed, and we don't have an issue. You also want to make sure you have attribution, because that'll come back and bite you also.
It will.
Scott, that's great advice, and we are unfortunately out of time. And I'm going to bet that our people who are listening or watching are going to want to find you. So how would they go about doing that?
The best way to do that is go to reiblaw.com, www.reiblaw.com, and we have /crack the code. And if you'll go to that page, we have a special offer just for you guys for listening today, where you can download that ebook, the 7 strategies, the e-version of my book, and book a 20-minute, what I call laser legal coaching session with me, so we can dive into your business and try to help you shatterproof it.
Cool. And I've got 2 things I'd like you to do, and you know what the first one is. I ask it every single podcast episode, and that's please go to where you're listening to this podcast and give us an honest and rating review. If you're new to our podcast, welcome. I'm glad you're here. And if you like what you heard today, you can give us 5 stars. If you hated it, well, I hope you didn't. But if you did, you can give us 1 star, and I'll cry a little bit, but maybe I'll get over it. Maybe I won't. And the second thing is, I just published my second book called The Sale Ready Company. It's a continuation of our business parable with our friendly Aardvark family. This time, John Aardvark is actually starting to think about transitioning out of his business. We have all sorts of fun things that happen as John decides who he's going to transition the business to, how he's going to transition the business, if he can transition the business, and when it's going to happen. So it's really easy to get. Just go to www.salereadycompany.com, where you can buy the book for 50% off. We're selling it for $7.95. And along with that, you can also get into our resource center. We have all the how-tos on do the stuff that's actually in the story of the Sale Ready Company. So this is Josh Patrick. We're with Scott Reib. You're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here really soon.